Welcome back to the Aura Podcast. We got a special guest with us today, Tim Van Weerden. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Tim, the results just came out not too long ago. You've been voted in as president of OSU. By the time this comes out, it will be maybe before or after your ratification. So pending on the way that goes, it will officially become, you'll officially become the president of the student union. Just tell me how that feels for you personally.
It feels very good. I remember when I first got into OSU, which is about 2 years ago. I started as a CRO. I remember talking to my good friend Yahaya, who was the president at that time. So I kind of saw from the background, what the president did and what the responsibilities were for him as the president at that time. And from that time, I already had, in the future, I was hoping maybe perhaps one day I can run for president myself, right? Or I was hoping that, maybe in the future that could be a role I could see potentially fulfill myself. So then 2 years later, when you run for it, it feels, I was very stressed during the week of the election itself because, you work for something for 2 years and then it finally comes to that point that you have been working for so long. Mm-hmm. So then to finally, the results have come out and I'm happy with the results. So after 2 years of being with Austin and then to step into this role, it feels very nice.
Where does that stress come from? As you said, you talked a bit about how it comes with the magnitude of thinking about the plan you laid out for yourself and getting to the moment where it's time for you to execute that plan. But also, did the stress also come from the just planning out an election campaign per se, getting your material, getting your talking points ready, try to draw down what you actually want to give to students? Where did that stress come from?
Well, I think at least you have two factors of stress, I think, in this case. The first one is just generally putting yourself out in public and you're becoming vulnerable, right? Like when you go for a position like the VP position that I went in last year, you may tell 4 of your friends, oh, I'm getting an interview for this position, right? So if you don't get it, you have 4 people that you have to explain yourself to, oh, I didn't get the interview or I didn't get the position, right? But when you run for a position like the president or any other of the representative positions, you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position, right? The whole student body, even staff, the teachers, they all got their election results, right? So if you lose, it's a bit more, not embarrassing, but, you're exposing yourself a bit. Where and also, the whole campaigning thing, you can't tell 5 people you're running for a campaign. You have to get as many people telling them that you're running for a presidency position, right? So then to explain yourself after, let's say you lost, it's just a bit more stressful, right? You're putting yourself in a vulnerable position. So that's one factor, I think, that caused the stress. Or just makes you nervous, right? But the other factor is, as you said, like I've been working for it for a long time. This was something that I was hoping to get into the future. And then when finally that moment is there that you have been working hard for. And the thing is too, I enjoyed my time at OSU regardless. Like let's say I didn't get into this position as president, I would have been very satisfied with my role that I had been in OSU, whether that was as a CRO. In the beginning, when I started with OSU, or my VP position this past year, regardless, I would have been very proud of what I got to do for OSU. But it was definitely a milestone that I had set for myself. To that time. And it's also like, I remember one of my close friends telling me too, it's like, when you run for president, it's not that 5 days that matter. It's what you have done all that time before, right? So during those 5 days, I realized too, I can do a lot of campaigning, but your campaigning is what you had done all that time before as a student, right? So you're starting to doubt yourself. You're asking yourself, oh, did I do enough as a student? Did I really put in that work, whether that was as a VP or a CRO or part of the soccer team or whatever? Did I really put in the effort that I had to do to, get into a role like this? So I think that stress factored into it as well, right? It's a good position. It's a big position. It's something that, I desired as a student. I desired as a personal goal. So then to finally get into that thing, not that I was immensely stressed, but it definitely was, you get nervous.
Well, how about the fact that at the same time, I believe you have a course overload as well. So you being a student doesn't stop because you're running for president. It becomes, now you have to add that to you also being a student. So how do you manage that?
Well, I think, it is tough, right? Like taking an overload. I remember like I decided to take a second degree in psychology, which required me to take an overload. And at the time, you're thinking an extra course, what does it mean, right? But then when I started to take it, that extra course matters a lot. And I think when it comes to it, it's not how do you manage, it's are you willing to sacrifice the time that it requires, right? Like I don't have more time than any other student. It's just I had to ask myself, am I willing to sacrifice, going out, hanging out with my students, or am I going to sacrifice that time that I'm willing to sacrifice, to get that second degree and also on top, work in my VP position this last year or any other position that I fulfilled this past semester. I think it comes down to if you're willing to sacrifice the time, right? Like this past semester itself too, I didn't have much free time. I couldn't go out as much as I maybe normally would have liked. So that's just how you do it. You sacrifice the time that is required. In terms of obviously it requires some organizational skills, requires some planning, but it's really asking yourself, are you willing to sacrifice the time that a position like that requires? And I think thus far I've always been willing to sacrifice some of my personal time to achieve some personal milestones, I would say.
I'm curious as to, because I would assume that when you prepare for a campaign, you already map out what you want to offer to students. Mm-hmm. But I would assume like when you're doing the whole campaign and you're talking to students, you're learning things that you didn't know students really cared about. Mm-hmm. So what was that like? Because you have to be flexible in terms of like, oh, okay, I should also address this if I were to become president. So what was that like? What did you learn throughout the campaign about the student body that you probably didn't know before?
Well, like during a campaign, you're really targeting the students that don't know ALSU, right? So like in the past year, you really get to interact with students that know ALSU. Like you basically see whether you're hosting an event, you kind of see that same group of students constantly coming to an event, right? But during my campaign, one of my main strategies is targeting the people that don't know ALSU. Those are the people that you need to reach out to. And obviously when you target those people, you hear different concerns, different issues, right? And I think one of the main things that I've really come to the conclusion to, whether that was this past year I've seen throughout and even in my campaign I noticed, I think lots of students don't know the difference between ALSU and Algoma University. And then obviously we overlap in many areas, but ALSU is its own independent organization from Algoma University, right? So that's definitely one of my main goals in this coming years, to really brand ourselves as a separate independent organization from Algoma University, right? I think lots of students, when an event is hosted, at least talking to many students, right? They had no clue what ALSU was, what ALSU does, how it is separate from Algoma University. So that's definitely one of the issues that I started to realize during this campaign. It's like there's a large group of students that just doesn't know the difference between Algoma and ALSU and just doesn't know what ALSU does in general, right? Like we have so many services that we provide that students are just simply not aware of.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing you see that as a responsibility of ALSU to fix that issue rather than it being beholden to students to know those things. Because I would assume as a student, you're busy. Like whether you have your part-time job or whatever, you have your own classes to worry about. Like, what ALSU does or whatever, sometimes that doesn't even cross your mind until you need a service from ALSU. Mm-hmm.
No, you're 100% right. Like that's something that's ALSU's responsibility. Any organization, whether that's a non-for-profit, an actual for-profit, branding is your own responsibility, right? Unawareness in the market is not the market's fault, it's your own responsibility, right? So, and you're right, like students are busy, right? Like being a student is not easy, right? Like you have your classes, you probably have a part-time job that you have to deal with. If you're a mature student, you may have a family, you may have children, right? So being a student is not easy, right? You may simply not have the time to attend ALSU events, right? But regardless, like when we look at our insurance that we provide, even the food pantry, those are services that can be very helpful to students, right? So I definitely see that as ALSU's responsibility to brand ourselves as a separate organization, that when students are asked, hey, do you know about ALSU? Do you know what we do? That they can give a concise answer, even if they have never been to one of our events, that they at least are aware that we are there whenever they need something from us.
Mm-hmm. And outside of the branding, I know you ran on a few other things. Talk to me a bit about what you ran on.
Well, like there are a few things, like even like obviously I worked for ALSU in my VP position last year, right? There are definitely some goals that I would like to see established. One of them was our aura, right? And this podcast itself, or the sentient, it was one of my big goals to really give students the voice, right? Mm-hmm. I think when you look at organizations, a big mistake many leaders make is that they assume what their group wants, right? And I would never want to assume, it's easy that I as a president can say, oh, as a student, this is what I would have decided, right? Mm-hmm. But there are many groups of students I don't interact with on a daily basis, right? Or that I'm not aware of what they want, right? So I never want to assume as a leader what the people that I lead want as a student or, as a mature student, part-time student, whatever group they may associate themselves with, right? So that's why I was very big on getting Aura started again, right? Getting a sentient started again. It's a great source for students to voice themselves, voice their concerns, voice their issues, and to listen to different students, right? Like even when I looked at multiple Aura episodes, you get to see all these different students and the different perspectives, different roles, right? Whether that's from an athletic position, whether that's just as a full-time position, a part-time student, you get to see these different perspectives, right? And that's definitely something I would like to continue this coming year, really listening and hearing from the students, right? Because as an organization, we can only provide to the students if we know what they desire, right? Like we should never assume this is what the student body wants. We should always first listen and from there act on that. So that's definitely one of the goals. I hope to bring stability and a structure to ASU this coming year, right? Just if you have a stable organization, because like in this past year, these past 2 years at this point, lots of whether that's COVID or the war right now in Russia, we have lots of things that are happening that, it brings a lot of stress on students, right? So I'm definitely hoping to bring some form of stability for students, right? That at least their school, their classes are somewhat stable.
Yeah, and the reason I'm smiling because it's interesting because when I was watching your debate, you talked a bit about how you wanted to actually bring more accountability to ASU, and that's interesting to me because a lot of people that would be put in your position, the first thing they're thinking about is not really whether I need more people to hold me accountable, but it's something you're running on. Why is that?
Well, I always put a high value to self-awareness. I think knowing your strengths and your weaknesses is always important. And in the end of the day, I have to realize too that I'm a 20-year-old student in a pretty high position, right? If I had years and years of experience with ASU or years of experience within the business field, non-for-profit, it's a different story, right? But like every president, first of all, most presidents stay for 1 year, right? So some presidents may not know. Like I'm also running for accountability, not just for myself, but also because I've seen how important it is that the executive board or ASU itself is held accountable, right? So I'm really putting high value to it. As I said, first of all, self-awareness. I know I'm 20 years old. I know I haven't that much experience in the field. It's my first time in a high position, so accountability is key to a role like this, right? Second of all, as I said too, I know that in the future, like ASU has to be stable for students. Like ASU plays a big part in the student experience, right? So if ASU is unstable, that could definitely damage the student's experience. So in that sense, I think accountability is key, right? Like if a president is not fulfilling their job, they should be held accountable. And someone should be holding them accountable. And I think that shouldn't be the reps, right? I should never think that someone lower should hold someone higher accountable. In any field you see, that's not fair, right? So I definitely am hoping to be, and I know as also we're hoping to talk to some external sources to bring a proper structure to this. But I think it's very important for the president to be held accountable, and that if the president is not fulfilling their job, that there are some sanctions that can be put in place without having to involve the entire board or creating a lot of drama around it. So that's why I'm really big on it, because I believe, as I said, I'm hoping to be a good president. But the truth of the matter is, I could be president, or the truth of the matter is too, someone in the future could be a bad president, right? And I always want that the president is held accountable, right? As I said, I'm hoping to be a great president. But the thing, 3 presidents from now, there could be someone that has no clue about ASU or is not, strong, right? Because in the end, ASU or the president is a voted position, right? Yeah. Let's say only one person is running for president, could happen in 1 year. All of a sudden, this could be a president that has no clue about the history of ASU, may have never been in a leadership position before. It shouldn't take half a year before this president is being held accountable, right? There should be structures into place. And as I said, I'm doing this for myself, and as I think for my current board, but also I'm hoping for the future of ASU, that when the president is held accountable, I believe that provides stability to the organization, which in turn provides stability to the student union or to the students' experience at large.
Mm-hmm. And also adding on to that, you being voted in as president, there was also a whole other group of people who were also voted in, new women's affair representative, residence representative, diversity representative. And I'm sure even though you were focused on giving out your message during that debate, I'm sure you were able to also see, these other representatives talk about their plans. So what are your thoughts on everybody else that was voted in? Wayne, who was voted in as mature student representative. What are your thoughts on the whole representative group?
I actually knew, so 4 of the 6 people I believe that live in residence. So even though I haven't had close interactions with some of them, I've seen them around on campus, right? And listening to them, I think we all have the same picture in mind as providing stability for us and providing a good experience for the students, right? Whether that's the residence representative. I know lots of students this past year in residence. It hasn't always been an easy living on residence, right? For various reasons, right? So listening to Kennedy, who's going to be our residence rep, I see lots of inspiration to really make that residence experience great again, right? Same with all these other. Okay.
We understand.
Okay, so no, but even when I look at all these other positions, right? I think that when I look at all of them, what I really liked is that there was a general consensus that we want to provide the best experience for the students, right? And I think when I looked at them, I saw a team, right? Like that's what I really liked about the reps running. I saw a team. It wasn't a me-focused rep. It was always like, hoping to help the students, providing assistance to the students, making their experience better, right? Which I really, really like looking at the representatives. I'm looking very forward to working with them, right? Even you mentioned Wayne, someone with lots of experience in his life, right? Lots and lots of different scenarios that he got to experience, which I think is going to bring great value to all students coming year, right? Because one thing we do, we're a very young board, as I said, right? Like lots of young students, whereas there are many mature students at Algoma University, right? So having someone with that live experience, because on top of that too, as you said, right? Like me, for example, I just have school and work, right? But some people going to Algoma University have families, right? Have children, have a spouse, or have other things to deal with, like, and that can be very, very hard, and that's hard to recognize, especially for myself, because I've never lived in that experience, right? So having someone like Wayne on the board this coming year is going to be of great value, right? Someone that can understand that extra level of responsibility some students have and how it impacts their role. I've even seen, like, in some of my classes this past year, people emailing teachers and be like, listen, like, I have work conflict, I have children to take care of, which can be very hard as a student, right? So I'm definitely looking forward to work as a team to really, as I said, bring stability and bring a structure to all so that students will benefit from in the long term.
Mm-hmm. And at the conclusion of this campaign, like we've been talking about, you were voted as presidents, but what was that, those 24 hours or 48 hours of voting, when you really don't know whether all the work you have put in is really gonna come to, I guess, the outcome that you would obviously hope for. So what was that like? I know we talked a bit about stress in the beginning, but I have to assume that was really the pinnacle of stress in those 48 hours of just waiting to see what are the results.
It definitely was rough. On the other side, I was also happy it came to an end, because obviously the campaign is just stressful throughout the whole week. So I was happy, the last 48 hours is where the voting happened, right? So I was happy, we finally got into that phase, but it's also a different phase. That's where you sit back and you're like, it's up to the students at this point, right? Which is, it's not easy to always deal with. On the other side, what I try to do is reflect on this past 3 years, right? Like, even though as a student, many things haven't been easy, I was very grateful for what I got to experience, right? Whether that's being part of the soccer team or experience various jobs in Algoma University, or even in my various roles in also these past few years, I just reflected back and you know what? If I lose this election, I will still be proud as a student, and I can still be happy that I got to have all this experience at Algoma University, right? It wouldn't be the end of the world, right? And that's something I really told myself is, I can't control the outcome of this election, but I can control my response to the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I tried to do as much as possible, right? So, I had lots of great opportunities as a student that, some people may not have, right? And in that sense, I think it's always important to be grateful for what you have. And that was the attitude I tried to have coming into the election. Or try and get into those last, the final few hours. So, and I remember I was driving home with a few friends, so it was also nice having that surrounding with me when you get those results. And, I was very happy when I got the results, but especially those last few hours, very nerve-wracking. On the other side, as I said, I think the last few hours I was more calm than I was during the week because I found peace with the outcome, right? Like during the week, it's when you can still influence the outcome, right? Like that's when you have to campaign. Whereas the last few hours I realized too, there's nothing I can do at this point, right? Whether I win or lose, I've done my job. And as I said too, running for president or running for a position like this, it's not about those 5 days. It's really about those 3 years that I've done as a student before, the relationships I've built, the connections I was able to establish. So those last few hours, even though I was stressed and nervous, I also found peace in the sense that I was like, you know what, no matter the outcome, I did my piece. I will still be proud. If I lose, I will give my component a handshake, wish him congratulations, and move on, right? Because I've had lots of experience as a student, and I don't want one loss to impact my overall view of a student, right? Like that's how I try to get into this last final.
Let's talk about that whole idea of finding peace in the outcome, because when you're talking about that, you don't know what the outcome is. Mm-hmm. You just accept what the outcome is going to become. I know at the beginning of this year you had a rough time because you, as a student athlete as well, you're on the soccer team, and you're preparing for a season finally coming back after COVID. So you're getting ready to get geared up again, and you have a big injury. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about how that really reframed your mindset, because it's not something you expect to happen to you. As an athlete, you see injuries around you, but you don't think it's going to happen to you, but it happened to you. So mm-hmm. Talk to me a bit about that process with the injury and how that helped you with, even being at peace with the outcome of the election, even though you didn't know what it was going to be.
Well, even though, as I said, I had lots of great experiences beside athletic in Algoma University over these past years, but one of the main reasons I came to Algoma was for soccer, right? That's one of the reasons I came to Algoma. It was the main reason, basically, that I came to Algoma, right? So then, my first year I had my season, and the second year, even my first year, I struggled a bit with injuries, right? And in my second year, it was COVID. So my third year, I was really excited. Like, I worked hard this summer. I really got myself, to the fit enough to play the season. So I worked very hard this summer. And, finally, my third year, I finally get to play soccer again, right? In the second practice, I tear my meniscus. It was mentally very tough, right? Like, you're looking forward for something for so long. You literally, you worked your ass off to get fit enough to play again that season. And then, you finally get to that point again where you can play and then you tear your meniscus, right? And it was also an injury, it was no one else's fault. You just run and I fell to the ground and I was gone for the season, right? So it was very mentally tough to deal with. I think in generally too, like personally speaking, I think it's also, part of my faith as a Christian that I always try to trust God as much as I possibly can with any uncontrollable situation. But that's easier said than done, right? Like, you're on the field. I remember coming on a trip to Toronto with the soccer team, and you're looking at this amazing field and you see these guys play and you're like, crap, I was supposed to be on this field this season, right? And then you're on the sideline with a massive cast on, about to go into surgery, and that's very tough, right? Like, seeing what you're supposed to do. But even that, in what you said, like, that's where you learn, right? Like, there are some things in life you can't control, right? And I always believe, for example, when I was a little kid, when I would get a bad mark, for example, on a test, my mom asked me one question: did you do everything you possibly could, right? And if I said yes, he says, you know what? That's a bad mark, but you did what you could do, so the mark doesn't matter, right? And that's always what I try to ask myself when something bad happens to me, right? Did you do what you were supposed to do or what you could possibly do, right? Same with season. You know what? I did my responsibilities. I got fit that season, and that happened. Can't control it, so I accept that, right? Even in presidency, that's one of the questions I asked myself, let's say 2 or 3 hours before the results come out. I was like, Tim, did you do everything you could possibly control to win this election? And my answer to that, I believe, was yes. So no matter the outcome, I would have been happy with that, right? And that's something I always try to deal with in life. I ask myself 2 questions. Well, first of all, does it matter, right? Like, I think lots of time we worry about things in life that simply don't matter. I find myself, I really had to learn this because I used to stress about little things that in the end don't matter, right? So that's the first question I ask. And then the second question I always ask myself is, can you control the outcome, right? And if you can't, then I always try to sit back, right? And that's what I said. Like, during the election period, when I asked myself that second question, can you control it? I had to say yes. I had responsibility. I had to connect with students, had to come out. But those last final stretch, I can control it, right? And the same when I just tore my meniscus, for example. During the time when you're out, you can't control anything. But now that I'm off again, going back to the gym again, making sure I stretch, getting into recovering properly, that's something I can control, right? So that's how I always try to deal with something difficult. And I think, for students as well, these past 2 years have been difficult for a student, right? There's lots of times where news comes out that is just hurting as a student, right? Whether you're living on residence and everything is online, so you're in your room 24 hours, right? Or, as I said, mature students who may have to pay both for their tuition and for their family, and they lose their job, right? These past 2 years have been very stressful. And that's my sense as a president, that is my goal, right? To provide some sense of stability, provide some sense of structure so that students, can at least look at their student union and feel some sense of stability in there.
Mm-hmm. And you touched a bit about, like, some of the stuff you were able to experience in your professional role, as in jobs you have been, involved in. Talk to me a bit about your pathway in terms of the job. So from, COVID screener to this to that, you've done a lot of job within, Algoma University. So take me a bit through that and tell me why did you start taking on so many jobs?
Well, as I said, one of the things to believe is that you always have to take the best out of what you can, right? Yeah. I remember in my first year, I came here with 12 guys. Some of them were my best friends, I came here to university with, and 10 of them decided to go to a different school, right? So I remember I had to ask myself at that time, I was like, am I going to transfer to, or am I going to stay at Algoma? And I told myself, if you're going to stay at Algoma, it may not be easy because you don't have your close friends around you, so you might as well make the best out of it in terms of, your career, academic-wise, so I had to make the choice, right? Am I going to leave with my friends and choose for a social group, or am I going to stay here and really focus on myself personally, right? So I decided to stay, and then, the pandemic happened, so everyone was at home. So that was especially when I had to ask myself, right? So what are we going to do now? Am I just going to sit in my room, do nothing, or am I going to actually benefit from, or as much as possible from, a difficult situation like this, right? So I really tried and seeked out as many jobs as possible, right? I applied for many jobs in my first year. The first job I got at Algoma, I think, was as a residence advisor that I've been for 2 years now, 3 years. I think 2 years. So that was the first job I really got into Algoma University, and since then I've done lots of different things. I worked as a student tutor, both for the Algoma Connect program, which tutors high school students, as well as in general tutor. I moved on to work for the HR department as an HR assistant. I worked for the financial aid department. I worked obviously as a CRO and the VP Student Life for ASU. COVID screening, I worked as well in the beginning of COVID.
You're one of the first COVID screeners, no?
I was, yes. So, I was an OG, as they say. So I really started off there as well. And all those jobs, as I said too, they lead to something bigger, right? Like some people ask yourself, even in the role as the president, right? Like you don't go from no job at all to getting into president, right? Like it's really a long process. And even when we talked a bit about why I was so nervous, as I said, because it has been a long, a project, right? Like in terms of going from a small job to a bit of a bigger job, to even a little bit of a bigger job, to then finally apply for presidency. That's how I try to build up this past year, right? Like you can't jump from nothing to something major, right? Like the process is important. I think that's what many people fail to do. They always look at the outcome and not at the process that requires it, right? Like even as I mentioned before, I had to sacrifice lots of personal time this past semester, right? There were many moments not that I was close to a burnout, but I was really feeling it, right? But you have to push yourself and really have to sacrifice that personal time, right? Because at one point this semester I was working 30 hours paid. I was part of the soccer team, which took me many hours. Worked as an RA, and then taking 6 courses. It wasn't always easy, right? But in the end, it's something I was willing to sacrifice. And I think, as I said, I'm very grateful for all the positions Algoma had to offer me, and I'm hoping that's something I'm hoping to do for students, right? Offer them those positions and those roles for students, right? That when they leave Algoma, they can genuinely say, I was a proud Algoma University student. I'm very happy with the things I got offered by Algoma University. So I think, as I said, it was a slow project, and some of these things too, it's also a trial and error process, right? Like people think that every position I apply for I get. Like that's not the case at all. There were many times I had to apply 3 times for a position before I got it, right? Even my VP position, I didn't get it the first time I applied. It was the second round in, right, that I got it. But there was one lesson: you don't give up, right? I remember the second time I applied for the VP position, I was very scared because, the first time, you tell your parents, you're like, oh, I'm applying for a position like this, and you feel, and you're like, Mom, Dad, I didn't get it, right? And then the second time, are you gonna try and put yourself vulnerable again, right? Or even the presidency position. Those are things you're like, you put yourself in a vulnerable position, right? But you can never be scared to lose or to not get something, right? So that's something too. Like I didn't get all these positions, or it wasn't always an easy process to get these positions. It, as I said, I failed many times, and those few times I succeeded, helped me to continue.
Mm-hmm. Well, I asked Marissa this question, and I'll ask it to you too. You guys are very involved within the school, like we've been talking about this podcast. But one question I asked her is what is the point of doing all this? And I'm not, the way I'm asking it is not to be facetious, but I'm asking in a sense that you have a lot on your plate already as a student. Like we talked about, you don't have to do this. You can, deal with the stress of already being a student, but you guys are adding on more to your plate. Why do you guys do this? And is this really something that comes from within, wanting to get involved within the community, wanting to help people? Why do you guys do this?
I think for me it has 2 reasons. The first one is that, as a student, I experienced many difficult things. I started in my first year. There was lots of drama in my first year. And in the second year, you come into a pandemic, which is very rough dealing with as a student, right? So struggling as a student myself, but then coming out of it stronger, it really made myself the goal to, help other students with that. I know lots of students are struggling, even today, whether that's on campus or off campus. Living throughout this time with lots of things happening in this world is just not easy, right? So then to help my friends and help other students around to have a little bit of a better experience at Algoma University really was my goal, and that's one of the reasons I really put myself out there to be involved in ASU, right? Because as I said, I had many other jobs as well, and also HR, financial aid, but I really tried to be in a student union because it was one of my goals to help students and improve their overall experience, right? As I said, I have seen many students struggle throughout this pandemic or even in my first year. Being a student is not easy, right? I remember when you're in high school, people are always like excited about going to university. I remember when you're young, you're like, oh, freedom and, independency. Until you come to school and you have to do your own laundry, right? Those are little things you don't think about. Or you come to school and all of a sudden you're like, oh, cooking is also a thing that you have to take care of. Or, oh, keeping your room very clean and you don't have your mom constantly knocking on your door to keep your room clean, also a responsibility, right? Or even in general, like, as I said, like, I've seen lots of, conflict within the school or people just being stressed out, depression, anxiety. Those are all real things students have to deal with, right? Being a university student is just not easy. And so that has been one of my goals to really help students in that sense. And then on the other side too, one of the goals is to, I always try to think in the future and think ahead, right? Like, as I said, I'm hoping to be, have a good career in the future and hoping to sacrifice. I always believe that if you're not willing to, I would say success requires sacrifice to some degree, right? And if I want to, the habits I build today are the habits I'm going to have when I'm 29 or 30, right? So if I'm going to be in my room all the time, watching Netflix, what is then to say, oh, when I'm 30, that's when I will really focus on my career, right? I don't want to be, I want to always continuously try to improve myself. And the habits I build today are the habits I'm going to live out when, maybe I start my family or really build my career in the future. So that was also a big motivator to just, say, Tim, you got to put in the effort, got to put in the work to, have something in the future that you can be proud of. And that's something too, right? I always want to look back when I'm leaving Algoma University in, let's say, 2 years or so, that I can say I gave it my all, right? Especially when my friends left, I made the decision that, I'm staying in Algoma, not because of the friends I have here, and even though I made some great friends after that past year, but when my friends left or when I made the decision to stay, I wasn't sure who I was going to connect with the next year, right? So when I made that decision, I was like, you know what? I want to leave Algoma in, let's say, 4 years from now, and being proud of what I have established, right? And I can genuinely say that thus far, I'm very happy with what I have been able to do and what I'm hoping to continue to do, so that when I leave Algoma, I'm proud to say that I'm a Thunderbird, and I'm proud to say that I went to this school.
So as we close this episode, give students a picture of what is to come in the next few months. What is that transition like from this board of ASU to your board of ASU? When do you actually start working? And like I said, what are they to expect, especially in the summer months as we get into the new school year?
So this board is probably going to start at the end of the semester, right? So the new board is the board of the spring, fall, and the winter. That's usually how it works within ASU, right? So then in terms of what students can expect, I'm really hoping to, as I said, my big goal is to just provide stability this year. Because I know, as I said, lots of students with lots of doubts, insecurities, fear. As I said, we come from a pandemic. There's currently a war happening in Europe. There's lots of factors that are just very, very heavy on students, right? So I'm really hoping to provide some stability. I'm also hoping, we're transitioning out of this pandemic. So I'm hoping to transition properly out of this pandemic, right? I know the speakeasy is opening up again. I know we can slowly do in-person events again. So I'm definitely hoping, to almost give that experience. I remember when I was in my first year, I had a great time. There were lots of events happening. You got to connect with people, whether you were in residence or off campus. You always met new friends. Lots of things happening. So I'm really hoping to do it as, within the boundaries that the school gives us to, provide that student experience again, right? That when you're on campus, you really feel like a student, right? So that when students have in this coming year, they have lots of events going on. They can really connect with people. Because that's one thing too to understand. There are people at Algoma University that are entering their third year this coming year and may have never connected truly with a person in person, right? Or maybe never been on campus, right? So really providing that on-campus experience, that's really one of my main goals as we are transitioning out of this pandemic. That's, as I said, maybe have some nice events in the speakeasy. All these other things that we can provide, maybe, athletic events, really bringing students out. Intramurals I'm hoping to bring to this coming year. So that's one of the main goals I'm having. And one thing too, I'm hoping to ask too is, but my goals during the spring and the fall mainly is to listen to students, as I said before, right? I don't want to make the default that I say what I desire as a student is what the general student body desires as a student, right? So my main goal too is to listen, right? And I encourage students to always email us, to always, send us a DM on Instagram or send us an email with just a general thing and be like, hey, we're part of this this group, right? Let's say you're a law student. Can we please have, what is there for us? You know, like really asking the students to reach out for us, because we can only do and make the student experience better if we hear from the students, right? Because I don't want, as I said before, assume that what I desire as a student is what the general student body desires as a student. So I really encourage students to reach out to us, help us, and that's, again, continue with Aura, continue with the Sentient, and I encourage students, you know, to watch this and read it, because it, you know, it gives a good overview of all these different groups, right? Because a general student may not really understand what it's like to be a student athlete, right? Or another student may not really understand what it's like to, you know, someone that's off campus doesn't really understand what it's like to live on residence. And whereas someone else may not really understand, you know, itself, you know, what it's like to be a mature student and have a family to deal with on the side, right? So all these different groups, you know, listening to all these things is really important, I think, for students to understand the different groups that we have at Algoma University. So that's what I would encourage students as well for.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered a bit of everything. Obviously, we're happy to have you back anytime you have some new news to give to students. And thank you for coming through.
Thank you.